Hello, I'm Jill Vellerman and I'm a 5-step assessor and trainer. And the aim of this short video is to give you an overview of the competency framework that underpins the delivery of the 5-step method. It's to explain why this competency framework is integral to the successful delivery of the intervention. And we're also going to, in the second part, summarise the accreditation process that practitioners may wish to pursue and which is based on the competency framework. Now, the 5-step method has been described as deceptively simple. At face value, it can seem like a very straightforward intervention, and in many ways this is true. However, the skills required to deliver the intervention competently and confidently, and to ensure adherence to the evidence-based stress strain coping support model that we have developed are a bit more complex and nuanced. Now, in terms of the 5-step method, what's important about it? So, it's essential that the practitioner remains in control of the process, leaving the family member to be in process of the content of the session. And some of the key processes that a practitioner must follow throughout the intervention include structuring all of the intervention sessions to ensure that everything is covered. Quite often when we're assessing tapes, many things are left out. So it's really important to structure it well. It's also the second thing is to maintain focus on the affected family member throughout. And this is opposed to focusing on the relative with the problem, and that quite often can slip. So really important to focus on the family member. It's also resisting the urge to tell a family member what to do or to try to fix things for them. And finally, it's about applying the core counselling skills to each of the steps. So in order to support practitioners with all of this, we've developed a competency framework. And this framework equally applies to if you're seeing a family member individually, in a group, face-to-face, or increasingly over Zoom sessions. Now, one of the interesting things is around the evidence about training and competency. And before we explain the framework in detail, it's worth highlighting that there is really solid evidence, both for the process which supports the fidelity of an intervention after people have been trained to use it, and for the accreditation processes that build confidence that an intervention is being delivered correctly and really well. And this is actually summarised as part of drug and alcohol findings, which is a very useful summary of all the evidence. So the headlines from this evidence is simply put about training courses, in that training courses typically fail to sustainably or appreciably improve practice or outcomes. And this leads to an implementation gap. And that gap is between the research-tested intervention and real life. And that sending counsellors, practitioners away on a course is often a waste without giving people post-workshop feedback on their performance with clients, and ideally allied with expert coaching. And it's really interesting that drug and alcohol findings, having reviewed a great deal of international evidence, have come down so clearly in stating that simply offering routine training with no clear competency frameworks and no monitoring of fidelity to these competencies can be a waste of time and resources. The competency framework. And this slide just shows the first part of the self-assessment form, which practitioners listen to their recording and then they rate their session. So this form is easy to use. You score it about how well you've done, and then you fill in some of the evidence. And there's a competency framework for each of the 5 steps and a further section for the core counselling competencies. And this form is available on the website. So what is the competency framework? So the 5-step method is a semi-structured intervention. And one of the key parts of the structure is there are various tasks that a practitioner needs to achieve to ensure that the 5-step method is as helpful as it can be for family members. As I said in the introduction, one golden rule is that the practitioner should always be in charge of the process, with the family member being in charge of the content. So for each of the 5 steps, there are 6 tasks or competencies which the practitioner needs to ensure are gone through. And for each of the 5 steps, 2 of the tasks cover what should be included at the beginning and then at the ending of the session. And the other 4 tasks for each of the 5 steps are specific to the aim of that step. And there are also 5 core counselling competencies which practitioners need to use throughout the entire intervention. And I'll come on to that later. So for the 5 steps, the tasks are numbered for administrative purposes. Apart from the beginning and ending, the other tasks do not have to be followed in the order in which they're listed during each step of the intervention. So we've also developed a checklist, and this breaks down the competency framework and it lists all the tasks for the step. So while we don't suggest you use this as the main resource, it can be a useful quick reference guide to look at during the session, and it helps clarify that you've covered each criteria for that step of the intervention. So the key principles behind the competency framework. So these should always be considered when you're delivering the 5-step method. So what happens is, for each step that is being assessed, we ask, so from listening to the recording, do we feel the practitioner has demonstrated enough skill in this step to become a 5-step practitioner? And to answer this question, we use 2 other questions first. So did the practitioner structure the session so that all aspects of the step being undertaken were covered? And did they ask the right questions? And second is an interesting one. So if I just listened to the practitioner in this recording and didn't listen at all to the family member, would I hear evidence from the practitioner of a good 5-step method? So we go through all the criteria and the tasks for each step in more detail in all the other videos in the series that is available. So why is the competency framework important? It's a constant reminder of all the competencies and skills required to deliver the whole 5-step intervention. It's a really good reminder. And if a practitioner is prepared to regularly use and revisit the competency framework, there is less risk of the dilution of training effect, whereby the longer ago somebody was trained in an evidence-based intervention, the greater the chance of drift and of them delivering an intervention that is not what they were trained to use. And finally, the competency framework allows practitioners to reflect on their 5-step method practice over time, and it supports their professional development. So for this reason, we recommend that those people who supervise practitioners who are using the 5-step method are familiar with the intervention and with the competency framework, even attending a training course if they can. So, having looked at the competency framework, I want to move on now to the practitioner accreditation process. And this is an important role of the competency framework in that it's the way that somebody who's been trained in the intervention can become accredited by AFINET as a 5-step method practitioner. We strongly recommend that trainees aim for this and that services and organisations support practitioners to become accredited. Accreditation is a key first step towards a service embedding the 5-step method in their practice. In fact, in another video clip, in this series, we show how a service can become self-sufficient with the 5-step method, with the service training and accrediting their own practitioners. So the process to become accredited has 2 parts to it. First, with the permission of the family member or family members, a practitioner should audio record or Zoom record their 5-step method intervention session. And that can be delivered individually, in groups, by phone, or on video conferencing software, say such as Zoom. Secondly, a practitioner should listen to their own recording of each step, and they complete a self-assessment using the competency framework for that step. And in that self-assessment, they should both provide evidence for how they're meeting that criteria and give them also a score for that, how well they've done, a score out of 5. Practitioners should also comment on any improvements that they feel they need to make moving forward. And if feasible, a practitioner may want to work with a colleague or a supervisor on this process. Thirdly, if having listened to themselves and then completed the assessment, they consider that the step they have assessed is a sufficiently good standard, then the practitioner might want to submit it to AFANET so they can complete the competency framework document alongside the audio recording of their session. So when that's done, the work will be assessed by one of the international network of accredited assessors, and they will give them incredibly comprehensive feedback. And then a practitioner, and they're encouraged to, is to submit each step of an intervention one at a time and have that assessed before moving on to the next step, because that allows for improvements to be made following assessors' feedback. So the same errors aren't repeated. But where that's not feasible, a practitioner can submit all steps of an intervention at the same time. What happens then is the practitioner receives the feedback with the scores, and they either pass to become accredited or they have to address an action plan before passing. And as part of that action plan, they may be required to undertake and record another session, or there just might be some small aspect that they need to discuss with their supervisor. It takes time for an assessor to listen to each recording and assess and comment on that recording and on the practitioner's self-assessment. And so there is a cost for each practitioner to become accredited. It takes well over between 10, 15, 20 hours of an assessor's time to listen and write their comments on all 5 steps. So a practitioner should wait until they feel comfortable and confident enough with the intervention before going through the accreditation process, probably waiting until they have delivered a full intervention a small number of times, but it's up to that practitioner. Once accredited as a 5-step practitioner, people are then eligible to become 5-step method assessors or trainers. So let's move on to some key tips. So one of the important things is about recording your step. Do check that you're actually recording. Practice it first of all and then check. We have sometimes on a number of occasions had things in that you can't hear quite clearly. So do check that out. Check your sound level is sufficient and the quality of the recording is sufficient. Many people simply use their phones to record, but if you do, you still need to check the things just outlined and to check that you know how to get the recording off your phone so that you can both listen to it to your self-assessment and send it in as part of the accreditation process. Next, I've already said that the structure is really important. It's the practitioner's job to control the process for each step and to cover all the competencies within the time available. Preparation and practice are key and central if you want to keep fidelity to the model. Moving on, I also want to stress the self-assessment process. It's really important. The best way to improve is to critically assess your work against the competency framework. And remember to cite evidence from your recording to corroborate both what you write about how well you've met each competency and to clarify what improvements you think you should make in future. Remember, the assessor will be doing exactly the same thing. He or she will be looking for evidence in the audio recording to show that you meet each competency for each step and your counselling skills. And there's lots more guidance about this in handouts on the AFANET website. I'd like to now go over some of the key tips for accreditation. And the first part relates to the 5 recorded steps that you'll need to do. And the first thing to emphasise is preparation and practice. You need to get used to having yourself recorded and listening to yourself. It's really useful to use the competency checklist when you do this and to just check off that you've covered all the key areas. It's vital to actually check you've got a good enough recording. The sound levels are good enough, the quality levels, and you've set up the Zoom correctly to record. We've had a number of things come in and we can hardly hear them or it's muffled, so really do check that procedure. It's also vital to check that if you do it on your phone, that you can get the recording off the phone as well. So all those practical issues are very important. So record yourself practicing each of the 5 steps, and then you can do it for real when you feel confident enough with a family member. Do read all the guidance tips and the common problem sheets, which are fully available on the website, as people really do find those helpful and you can avoid making some of the common errors and improve your practice. It's also very vital to try to gain feedback on step 1 before you proceed to the subsequent step and so on. And that way you can incorporate the feedback into your next step. The steps can be with different family members. And to emphasise, do think about timekeeping and do have a clock in the room so that you can structure your session appropriately and give the allocated amount of time to each area. So they're the tips around the actual recorded steps. So once you've done those, do listen back to your tape and critically assess yourself using the competency assessment sheet. You might find it helpful to get feedback from friends, from peers, but you must self-assess before you send it in. And this is mandatory for step 1, 3 and 5. We do recommend it for all the steps, but if you are short of time, they are the absolute critical ones. And the key thing is people dramatically improve their skills. And people find they're a bit hesitant about listening to themselves because that can be quite nerve-wracking, but I can't emphasize enough how much it improves practice and gaining the feedback from the accredited assessor. So how do you become accredited? So the accredited assessor will listen to your work, and then the pass rate is about 65%, but it's mainly getting scores of 3.5 out of 5 and above. So that means above average. So practitioners get a huge amount of feedback related to the competency and key improvements, and that's all summarised in an action plan. And as said, people find it really useful, and so many people have said that it helps improve their practice. So moving on, we do recommend that you try to submit a step 1 within 2 months of training. And the feedback from the accredited assessor is normally given within 10 working days, so quite quickly. And if you're under a deadline and you need it back more quickly, then do let us know. And try to submit a step per month. So I hope that's given you some key tips for accreditation.